They said bullets could not touch him. For years, the British tried to kill him, but he seemed invincible. His aunt, a powerful medicine woman, had given him protection that made him untouchable in battle. Until one day, the magic failed. This is the story of Chief Otenyo Nyamaterere, the Gusii warrior who dared to wound a British commander and paid the ultimate price. His name was Otenyo Nyamaterere, and he was born around 1880 into a world that was about to be torn apart. In the rolling hills of what would become Gusii, young Oteno grew up without parents, raised instead by the most feared and respected woman in Gusiiland, his aunt, Moraa Ng'iti. Moraa was no ordinary woman. She was a medicine woman and prophetess whose powers were whispered about throughout the region. She could see the future, heal the wounded, and most importantly for the battles to come, she could protect warriors from bullets. The Gusii people turned to her not just for healing, but for the magical preparations that would make their fighters invincible. Under Moraa's guidance, Oteno grew into something extraordinary. The Gusii warriors were already feared throughout the region. They won all their battles and were known as fearless hunters. But Oteno was different. He wasn't just brave, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed he could not be killed. In 1904, that confidence would be put to the test. The British arrived in Gusiiland with a force called the King's African Rifles, led by a young officer named Geoffrey Alexander Northcote. The locals would come to know him by a different name, Nyarigoti, and they would learn to fear him more than death itself. The British came not as guests, but as conquerors. They raised the Union Jack over Gusiiland and declared it theirs. But it wasn't enough to claim the territory. They wanted to break the spirit of the Gusii people. What followed was a massacre that would be remembered for generations. Northcote's men swept through Gusii villages like a plague. They shot anyone who resisted, men, women, children. They burned houses to the ground and destroyed farms. They took whatever they wanted, livestock, grain, even women to entertain the British soldiers. The message was clear: submit or die. But the Gusii were not a people who submitted easily. Led by warriors like Oteno, they fought back with spears and poisoned arrows against rifles and cannons. For 3 years, they made the British pay for every inch of ground. Northcote found that conquering Gusiiland was far harder than he had imagined. In 1908, Northcote decided to end the resistance once and for all. He planned a raid that would break the Gusii spirit forever. His target, the cattle camps known as Ebisarati, where the people kept their most precious possessions, over 8,000 head of livestock that represented the wealth and survival of entire clans. The raid was devastating. Northcote's forces struck at dawn, overwhelming the defenders with superior firepower. By the time the sun set, thousands of cattle were being driven away, and the bodies of Gusii warriors lay scattered across the battlefield. Among the few who escaped was Oteno, his young daughter Bosibori, and his aunt Moraa. That night, as they watched the smoke rising from their burned villages, Oteno's heart filled with a rage that threatened to consume him. The British hadn't just stolen their cattle, they had stolen their future. Without livestock, his people would starve, children would die, the Gusii way of life would disappear forever. "I will kill Northcote," Oteno told his aunt, his voice shaking with fury. "I will make him pay for what he has done to our people." But Moraa looked at her foster son with eyes that had seen too much death. "You cannot face his guns with anger alone," she said. "But I can give you something more powerful than bullets." What happened next would become legend. Moraa gathered the surviving warriors in a sacred grove and began preparing them for what she knew would be their final battle. She gave them traditional beer to strengthen their courage and medicine to protect their bodies. But for Oteno, she prepared something special. Using ancient knowledge passed down through generations of medicine women, Moraa created a powerful protection ritual. She rubbed sacred herbs into Oteno's skin and spoke incantations that would make bullets bounce off him like raindrops. When she was finished, she looked into his eyes and made a promise. The white man's guns cannot touch you now. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Northcote was moving slowly as his men drove the stolen cattle toward the British stronghold. Oteno and his warriors would take a different route, get ahead of the column, and wait in ambush in the thick bushes called Ebitutu near what is now Manga. For hours, they waited in absolute silence. Then, through the morning mist, they saw them. Dozens of British soldiers and their Nubian allies driving thousands of stolen cattle down the narrow path. And there, riding at the front of the column, was the man Oteno had sworn to kill, Geoffrey Alexander Northcote. The attack was swift and brutal. Gusii warriors emerged from the bushes like spirits, their spears and poisoned arrows finding their marks before the British could react. In the chaos, Oteno fought his way toward Northcote, his aunt's medicine coursing through his veins, making him feel invincible. And then he saw his chance. Northcote was trying to rally his men, shouting orders as bullets and arrows flew around him. Oteno drew back his spear, took careful aim, and let it fly. The weapon struck Northcote in the right shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground. For a moment, Oteno thought his aunt's prophecy had come true. The most feared British commander in Gusiiland lay bleeding in the dirt, apparently dead. Gusii warriors around him cheered, believing they had killed their tormentor. Songs were already being composed in Oteno's honor, but Moraa's magic had its limits. Northcote was wounded, not dead. As British reinforcements arrived and the tide of battle turned, Oteno found himself surrounded. The medicine that was supposed to protect him from bullets had protected him from death, but not from capture. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Over 160 Gusii people were killed in the British counterattack. Oteno was dragged before Northcote, who despite his wounds, was very much alive and thirsting for revenge. The young commander looked at the warrior who had dared to wound him and smiled coldly. "So this is the famous Oteno," Northcote said, studying the man who had become a legend among his people. "Your magic wasn't strong enough, was it?" What followed was a public trial designed not for justice, but for humiliation. Oteno was paraded before his people, broken and defeated. On the day of execution, they brought him to what is now Gusii Stadium. A firing squad was assembled, their rifles loaded and ready. As Oteno faced his killers, he thought of his aunt Moraa, of his daughter Bosibori, of the thousands of cattle that would never come home. The rifles cracked in unison. Oteno fell, his body riddled with bullets that his aunt's medicine could not stop. But even in death, the British were not finished with him. On Northcote's orders, they cut off his head and hung his body from a bridge as a warning to any other would-be heroes. But the ultimate insult was yet to come. Northcote, proud of his victory over the legendary Gusii warrior, had Oteno's severed head shipped to London as proof of his death. The skull of the man who had dared to wound a British commander was placed in a museum, a trophy of colonial conquest. Moraa lived for another 21 years after her foster son's death, caring for wounded warriors and keeping the memory of Oteno alive. She died in 1929, her heart broken by the failure of magic that had always protected her people. But she had ensured that Oteno's story would never be forgotten. Under the cover of darkness, Gusii elders retrieved Oteno's headless body and buried it at the top of Manga Escarpment, where he had made his last stand. They could not give him the burial he deserved. His head was thousands of miles away in a foreign land, but they could ensure his body rested in the soil he had died defending. For over a century, Oteno's family grew and prospered. His daughter Bosibori had children, and they had children, until his descendants spread throughout the Manga and Matutu areas. They carried his story with them, passing it down through songs and tales that kept his memory alive. But there was always something missing, a wound that could never heal as long as part of their hero remained in foreign hands. In 2015, something remarkable happened. Gusii elders, led by the Council of Elders Chairman James Matundura, stood up and demanded what should have been theirs all along. They called for the repatriation of Otenyo's skull, still believed to be held in a British museum. "We want to bring back and bury the immortal Otenyo among his people," declared Gitu Wakahengari, chairman of the Mau Mau veterans. It had been over a century since a British bullet had ended the life of their greatest warrior. Wasn't it time for him to finally come home? Today, as you travel through Gusii County, you can visit the place where Otenyo made his final stand. You can see the hills where Moraa worked her magic and the stadium where he died. But you cannot visit his grave, not completely. Part of him still lies in foreign soil, a reminder of colonial wounds that have never fully healed. The story of Otenyo Nyamaterere is more than the tale of one brave warrior. It's the story of what happens when magic meets modern warfare, when ancient ways collide with imperial power, when a people's greatest protector discovers that some battles cannot be won with courage alone. But perhaps there was a different kind of magic at work, because more than a century after his death, Otenyo's name still echoes through the hills of Gusii. Children still learn his story. Elders still demand justice. And somewhere in a British museum, the skull of a warrior serves as a reminder that some spirits can never be conquered. They said bullets could not touch him. They were wrong, but they could never kill what he represented. The unbreakable spirit of a people who refused to surrender, the love of a land worth dying for, and the memory of a warrior whose magic was not in his aunt's medicine, but in the courage he inspired in others. His name was Otenyo Nyamaterere, and he is still waiting to come home.